This is LXPN TV, and I'm Colin O'Keefe. In a story that's generating a little bit of buzz, especially in the Bay Area, a faulty DWI breath test machine used in San Francisco may have had an impact on thousands of cases there. Joining me to discuss this story is criminal lawyer Daniel Koewler of Ramsay Law Firm, based in the Twin Cities. He is an author on the Minnesota DWI Defense blog. Dan, first off, how does something like this happen? Was it something wrong with the device? Or is it more so the handling of the device by the officers there?
Yeah, it's kind of both. When you've got any sort of breath test device, it's very good at detecting alcohol, in this case using fuel cell technology. Whenever there's alcohol, it creates a charge. The machine reflects that in its reading. But the machine is dumb in that it doesn't know how much alcohol it's recording. And so what you need to do is you need to teach the machine this much alcohol equals 0.08 or 0.10 or whatever your threshold is. And that's a continual process. In this case, the Alco-Sensor IV uses fuel cell technology, and that just naturally degrades over the life of the instrument. So you're instructed to continually test its accuracy against a known sample, like a dry gas sample that's always going to be an 082 or an 080. And so you test its accuracy periodically, and once the accuracy starts to slip, you recalibrate the machine. You reteach it, this is what you're looking for when you're looking for an 08. Yeah. And so it's essential when you're using a device like this to make sure that you're maintaining its calibration so that it can give you accurate results.
I see. And the officers there, it's my understanding, were, falling behind with the calibration of it. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a little unclear. I believe that it wasn't so much falling behind as that they were actively lying when they were filling out these logs rather than doing the calibration checks, testing it for accuracy. They were just filling in the log saying that it was passing every single time. And tons of credit needs to go to the public defender's office out in San Francisco. They looked at those logs and they saw that this machine was being freakishly accurate every time it was supposedly calibrated, and that raised a red flag for them. Otherwise, we may not have even heard about this.
Yeah, and then how did the police, you mentioned the public defenders, but how did the police and the other public officials respond to this? And then, I'm sure you've seen situations somewhat similar to this before. How did they respond versus, is that how people normally respond in these situations?
Yeah, and everything's different state by state. Here, actually a fair amount of credit is due, not necessarily to the police, but to the prosecutor's office. They stepped up and they admitted that this was a mistake, and they're giving people the opportunity to challenge any convictions they may have gotten based on this machine. Juries and judges place a lot of emphasis on technological evidence, and they like hard numbers. It's really hard to fight a test result when you've got that bold number that says above a 0.08. And so it really puts an additional ethical burden on the government. When they're going to use technology like this, they need to make sure that they're keeping those machines accurate, they're keeping them calibrated, just because of the undue emphasis almost that a jury will place on this type of evidence. So in this case, like I said, credit to the prosecutor's office for stepping forward and admitting that we weren't following the procedure. We're going to relook at all of these cases that were possibly tested on suspect devices. Now, were the devices actually inaccurate? That we can't know because the logs were forged. Yeah. In some cases, it's undoubtedly true that they were off. But in all cases, it really undermines public confidence in the whole judicial process. We're not just paying our officers to be vigilantes, to catch criminals at all costs. They've got a higher code and a higher duty to make sure they're not only catching and building cases against criminals, but they're doing it the right way. And in this case, the right way, at a minimum, means following the manufacturer's requirements for testing these instruments regularly to make sure that you're not getting artificially high results that are convicting innocent people.
So on that note, you touched on it just briefly, but how does this impact the prior conviction? So do people go back and challenge them? Is it easy to challenge them? I assume this leaves a lot of people and a lot of convictions, coming back and saying, hey, what about me? Was mine one of the tests that was messed up?
Yeah, and it does open up a lot of additional challenges that people would have thought were closed. People that pled guilty because they were told they tested above a .08. Now, and this is a roadside test. Its primary purpose is stated to be to determine whether or not the police have probable cause to arrest somebody. In almost every jurisdiction, there's a second test that's taken at the police station, and that's the test that they use to determine if somebody is actually over a .08. But like I said, juries and judges put a lot of emphasis on these numbers. Criminal defendants do too. Somebody who didn't think they were impaired, but this machine said they were at a .085 or over the legal limit, they're going to throw up their hands and say, well, what's the point in fighting it? I'm just going to plead guilty. So there is an avenue to go back and challenge these tests, ask that they be tossed out of evidence, so that the prosecutor can't even show it to the jury. And in a case like that, when you've got a crucial piece of evidence that's not going to make it in front of the jury, who's to say what impact that's going to have? I would suspect the prosecutor's office would dismiss in some of those cases, depending on the strength of the rest of their evidence. In other cases, you could go to trial and win. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really going to be a case-by-case sort of situation. People are going to need to weigh their options and decide what they want to go from there.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting story to track going forward, with these convictions. And then also, you hope that, I saw this story, it was initially covered on your blog. I saw it even pop up in the SF Gate just yesterday with their continued coverage. So you hope that maybe with the amount of coverage that it gets, that it's kind of a red herring for other law enforcement agencies across the country to make sure that their practices are in line with what they're supposed to be. So that'll be interesting.
And that's exactly true. This is nothing that's restricted strictly to the San Francisco Bay Area. This is an ongoing problem nationwide, and any good defense attorney follows these types of things closely. In 2009, the National Academy of Sciences actually issued a report, widespread criticism of how forensic evidence like this is handled by our judicial system and the lax standards and controls that are in place nationwide. And it does really fall upon the police and the prosecutors to make sure that they're meeting their ethical burden. Mm-hmm. They're paid by the taxpayers to keep us safe and also keep innocent people out of jail. And so it's a constant struggle between the defense bar and government agents to make sure that they are using these instruments correctly to the best of their ability.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that's going on. I mean, you want to keep people safe on the roads, but at the same time, you don't want to have innocent people going behind bars as well. Well, once again, that was Daniel Koewler of Ramsay Law Firm and the Minnesota DWI Defense Blog. For more on the story, be sure to check out his post. It's at mndwidefenseblog.com. And of course, we have more on this at lxbn.lexblog.com as well. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Colin.